Resident Evil is probably my favorite franchise of all time. I can't really explain to you why, aside from nostalgia. I came of age with this franchise when I was like 12 or 13 years old, which is unfortunately when a lot of things calcify into your brain. And there are like more acclaimed survival horror franchises like Silent Hill, or you could say the Soul series is like, you could say Resident Evil was Dark Souls before Dark Souls. Resident Evil is more accessible Dark Souls. Survival horror is a genre you either get or you don't. It's one of those if you know type of deals. If you don't enjoy being with and occasionally soft locked out of sometimes entire playthroughs, the genre might not be for you. I didn't replay every game for this list. Hell, there are games on this list that are high up that I haven't even played. But I've been obsessed with this brand now for going on 3 full decades of my life. So I feel like I have some expert level of intuition when it comes to the founding father of survival horror. So let's begin at the bottom. No, I'm not going to put obscure games like Gun Survivor 2 on this list, or the game. I put 2 games on this list that feature boats. I'm not doing Gaiden because I don't have emulated handheld software. And this game, I'm just going to leave it to a nice round even 20. And tier lists are for bitches. We're doing Topster here because we're not hierarchical on this channel. So tier lists are for bitches. And as you can see here, we have 4 tiers here. We have the, I guess we'll call the bottom tier the C tier, and then the B tier, and then the A tier, and then the S/God tier, all the way at the top. So let's just start off with, I'm not even gonna call it the worst. It's just, you're gonna hear this word a lot in the C tier. Not terrible, not unplayable, but mid. I played Resident Evil 6 once when it came out in 2012. I mean, just look at this box art here. It looks like a giraffe giving some kind of other animal. It's forcing a blowjob onto the giraffe is getting blown by this other entity, and it's kind of like maneuvering its arms around the behind the head of the giraffe. So I barely remember a single thing I did playing this game because I was high on Vicodin or Adderall, or actually both, I think, for most of the playthrough. But I also don't remember it because nothing in this game sticks. It's the game on this list. It's not even one of those games that it's so bad it's interesting. It's just kind of there. This game has ADHD, but it has like the bad kind of ADHD. You know what I mean? Like the boring kind of ADHD. It's the I don't care type of ADHD where a bunch of random shit is just smashed together to sell a game. I don't know any of the people who worked on this game. I'm not in the video games industry. I don't speak Japanese. I don't know anyone at Capcom. And yet I know with absolute certainty that not an ounce of joy was had making this game. Because I felt no joy playing this game. The one word that can sum up this, the one word that sums up this game for me is obligatory. If you play this game with a friend or a brother or a sister and had a wonderful time doing so, I am happy for you. But playing video games with another person alone doesn't make it a great video game or even a good one. This game was such a non-event that I am making an appeal to the Resident Evil community that we completely and utterly excommunicate this game from the Resident Evil canon. Give us a new Resident Evil 6, a redo. You could still have the ADHD-addled bucket of fried chicken buffet of, having the Leon scenario, the Chris scenario, the Slim Shady Wesker's son scenario, and of course the Ada Wong scenario, but make them good this time. And don't make the gameplay some maximalist smorgasbord of every design decision made in video games between 2005 and 2011. Number 19, Resident Evil Survivor. I don't hate this game. This game isn't as bad as RE6, mainly because it's like 1/20th of its runtime, but a gun con game where you can't use the gun con in the US because this game released during, the whole Columbine thing. The Europe and Japan releases came with the gun con, but you had to play this game with a controller in the States, unfortunately, which makes it not fun to play at all. But that's not the reason this game is on the list. The reason this game is on the list and why it's worth seeking out, not playing it necessarily, but seeking out a Let's Play on YouTube, is for the incredibly ironic character Ark Thompson. Ark is a man who has been framed for being a bad boy. He goes through the game completely unfocused, which makes for some iconically bad voice acting that gives OG Resident Evil 1 a run for its money. But because this game is lesser known, I'd say the Ark Thompson bits are funnier in this game because this game isn't as popular or as memed as OG Resident Evil 1. Like, how can you not laugh at
Vincent, it's me, your mother.
As the poor bastard is in the middle of a zombie outbreak, desperately trying to remember what the hell happened to him. And he's also friends with Leon, which is just really funny to me. Like, I like this idea of Leon having derpy-ass looking tools as friends. And despite the game playing like ass, it's wild how ahead of its time it was. Like, this game came out in the year 2000 and is entirely first person, which, the revival series we're currently in the middle of plays in first person. Number 18, Resident Evil Revelations. When I played this game on the 3DS in 2012, I remembered liking it. I even remember James Stephanie Sterling's review where they appreciated the game's like broken up chapter structure because they were able to take cigarette breaks in between episodes. And I remember doing the same thing because I was a smoker at the time. I am no longer a smoker, and I can confidently say that this game is mid-city in 2025. I wouldn't say it sucks. I would just say it's mid. This game is getting 7s in 2012 on a handheld system. So just imagine how that game must play and feel in 2025. I will say it's a decent looking port, considering the hardware it was made for, but that's about all the energy I can muster for it. Jill is just a blonde chick with a big ass in this one, a far cry from, her role in OG Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Look, I'm not saying big butts in a video game is evil or degenerate.
I love big butts.
All I'm saying is it's pretty average in a video game that has the average style that this game does, and this game does not have much style. And then there's Jessica, which honestly, I don't really have much of a problem with Jessica. I have more of a problem with Jill in this game because Jill has like a legacy, whereas Jessica is just like a throwaway one-time character for the edgelords. So what we have here is a Resident Evil side story on a boat where the two main characters from the first game are now teaming with B players no one remembers, and the two are still looking for each other. These motherfuckers are always looking for each other. I think the main reason I'm so indifferent to Revelations in 2025 is the common enemy zombie type, though, which, if you kind of squint, looks like a regenerator, but they're just so goofy and CGI looking that it takes me completely out of the experience whenever I play this game. I can't take it seriously. I also use a scanner in this game to get your score up. Like, this game has a scorecard at the end of each episode, which is taken from Metroid Prime, a game I don't have particularly fond memories of. So let's just lump Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2 together. Look, no one's life is going to change after playing either one of these. They're simple, over-the-shoulder, third-person action games that feature light puzzle solving reminiscent of Resident Evil 4. And while I slightly prefer Part 2 to Part 1, Part 2 is a far more frustrating experience, mainly because it was another Resi game that awkwardly tried to implement co-op to the single-player experience. And I'll be getting to the one game in the franchise I did single player co-op right for the most part. Whereas Revelations 1 focused on Jill and Chris and their unending search to find the other, Revelations 2 focuses on Claire and Barry Burton. That's right, Barry gets his own Resi game, and I just wish it was more interesting. Honestly, just give us DLC of Barry in the mansion from RE1. Revelations 2 tries to implement co-op by giving Claire and Barry a sidekick. With Claire, it's Barry's daughter Moira, and with Barry, it's the stock creepy girl with supernatural powers, which is something the Resident Evil franchise has been doing more and more since Revelations 2, which take that, it is what it is. Like, I'm not a fan of Dow stuff, really. It doesn't creep me out, but I understand the youth seem to be into that type of thing. So her power is the ability to point at items and then they shine on the screen, then you can pick them up. In theory, this sounds kind of decent, but in execution, it's very sloppy because it does the complete opposite thing Resident Evil 0 does, which, spoilers, is the game I'm going to talk about that does single player co-op the best. So we'll just... Resident Evil 0 will probably be too high on the list for some of y'all. In 0, the AI just wastes all your precious ammo, whereas in Revelations 2, the AI does absolutely nothing, meaning the game forces you to swap way too often between partners. So yeah, this is another game that's probably way better playing with another person rather than the AI. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about these two games. They're just the middest of the mid after RE6. Revelations 2 tried to cash in on the episodic structure that was all the rage in the 2010s after Telltale's The Walking Dead became everyone's favorite indie darling for a while, but that moment has passed and these games haven't aged well. Ooh, now we're getting juicy. The Resident Evil 3 remake, released during the first full month of COVID. The RE3 remake is a game that will probably place at the very bottom of a lot of RE fans' lists, and I completely understand why. It came out like in the midst of a bunch of like highly anticipated AAA releases, like the new Animal Crossing, Doom Eternal, the Final Fantasy VII remake, and unlike the Resident Evil 2 remake, it just kind of came and went. The reason why this is such a disappointment is, as you can see here, is that Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is legitimately one of the best games in the franchise. The 2020 remake isn't a bad game, but it is most certainly a bad remake. Actually, I wouldn't even call it bad. Like, if I was grading this game as a teacher, I would give it an incomplete because there is just stuff they just straight up omit in this game in the most frustrating way possible. So as a like hardcore fan of the OG, this remake is kind of blasphemous, even though I do enjoy playing it. Resident Evil 3 is like if you assigned a paper that had to be 5 pages, and then the person who sent in the paper double spaced it and then wrote it in like size 36 font, because that's how ridiculously short this game is. Like, there's no distinction between uptown and downtown Raccoon City. Like, Raccoon City as a personality in this game, there's barely any of it. Like, at the beginning, there's some good, like, interesting stuff. There's neat, like, action 90s action movie posters. And then there's the nod to Mega Man in the toy building, but that's really all you get. Unless you count the entire downtown section being the linear jaunt to an unremarkable flamethrower boss fight with Nemesis on a rooftop. The original game didn't need rooftops because it had confidence. So the positives: Carlos is better written, even though I'll still go to bat for OG Carlos. They're both good in their own unique ways, and the hospital section is now the highlight of the remake, which is pretty weird because we get zero Nemesis in the hospital. Isn't Nemesis supposed to be the entire selling point of Resident Evil 3? Also, the game looks really good, but Nemesis becomes a kaiju dog halfway through the game, so goodbye to having any stalker type of enemy for the rest of the second half of the game. And the pursue sections that do happen are pretty scripted and more reminiscent out of something like Uncharted, where it doesn't feel all that fun or thrilling. You just got to run in a straight line until you trigger the next cutscene, and if you fail it, you have to keep replaying the same linear thing over and over again until you do it, which I've never been a fan of. I don't know if this is the biggest sin because of all the Nemesis stuff, but like the two omissions, there's no clock tower and there's no dead factory. Instead of the clock tower, which was roughly 17% of the original game, I did the math, we get a boss fight in the clock tower with the clock tower in the background, almost as if like the developers are teasing us like, oh, look, asshole, there it is. Just, you're not going to be able to go in there. And then Capcom just replaced the dead factory, the game's final level, with another lab. Like, did we need a lab to end Resident Evils 1, 2, and 3? No, like, this game is already sterile enough with the hospital section, which is fine, but then, like, you're depriving me of, like, the tetanus-induced, like, chaos of the dead factory, replacing it with another lab? Like, off, no. All right, so we're going to move on to the next tier here. This is the B tier. The bringing up the rear in the B tier is Resident Evil Dead Aim, a game. Dead Aim is not a great game or necessarily a good game, but it has such an undeniable vibe, and like Survivor, it is mercifully short. It's the perfect Friday night rental game where it's like, I have no friends and I am in high school, and everybody in that high school is at homecoming tonight, but I'm a weirdo loser who's going to stay at home, walk to Blockbuster Video, and then beat Dead Aim at 2 a.m. on Saturday morning. It has quite arguably the best save theme in the entire series, which is insane considering the number of banger save room themes in the Resident Evil series. It has a main villain who is trans, but similar to Code Veronica, it kind of is in a cringy way because they're very evil and obsessed with beauty standards. It has another derpy ass main protagonist who also happens to be friends with Leon. Like, this whole thing where Leon, Ark Thompson, and Bruce McGivern are all best buds is so f***ing funny to me. Like, get a good look at this guy. Can we get a PvE Resi that is just these three guys and make it like a in the style of like a Remnant type of game where it's just like strike mode with these three. Dead Aim takes place on a boat, which is another knock against Revelations because Dead Aim already did the boat and it did it better. Well, okay, I guess you could objectively say that Revelations is a better game than Dead Aim, but that's a pretty boring fucking conversation, and honestly, I'd rather play Dead Aim, so it makes it a better game. Okay, up next is Resident Evil 5. 5 years separate Resident Evil 4 from RE5, and it is at this point in the franchise that the series seems to be taking more from other video games than Resident Evil. And no disrespect to RE5, but it feels like Capcom just wanted to make a Gears of War. RE5 is a very good game with a friend. You can have a co-op experience that can rival the best if you can play this with a good friend who isn't an ultra-competitive asshole who judges you for getting lost or not knowing what to do or just generally sucking at the game. But good luck finding that friend. But don't tell me this game is one of the best in the series when there are at least 5 Gears of War games that are better than that do what Resident Evil 5 does, but does it way better. Sheva isn't much of a character, and Chris is still dumber than a stack of bricks, which I'm fine with at this point. That's his character, and yeah. Thinking of this, but whenever I think of this game now, I think of, there's this YouTuber, the Happy Console Gamer, who's like Gen X, older, like 10, he's in his 50s, and he says, well, when this game was first announced, the developer was going on and on about how the sun was going to like factor into like the overall survival horror experience. Like, it was going to be scary as shit seeing the sun, I guess, like blind you in the face or whatever. And then he was very disappointed when the game came out and there was none of that, which is so funny to me because like the developer who said this was obviously full of shit. Like, how are you going to make the sun in a Resident Evil survival horror game scary in any way? I mean, we already got the angry sun from Super Mario 3, which that's the one instance in which you can say that the sun was actually scary and anxiety inducing. But God, this shit. All right, here we go. Another controversial pick. Resident Evil Village is next. I have no idea what to make of this game. I don't. Like, Resident Evil is such a frustrating franchise. There is stuff in this game that makes me glad it exists. The entire castle section is solid, dare I say, peak Resident Evil, but what does that even mean by 2021? Damn near everything, it turns out. Like 7, it divides the mansion section of the game, but not really because you never return to the castle once you leave, into areas with survival horror zombie content and areas with survival horror stalker content. If you were to ask me what defines this current revival period of Capcom in Resident Evil, I would classify 7 and Village as games that try to give everything to the player that has ever been Resident Evil. And Capcom just went ahead with Village and made the most schizophrenic game in the entire franchise because it somehow is able to remain faithful to every single period of Resident Evil, I guess, save for like there's literally no section where you're playing with you're playing with like old school PlayStation 1 graphics, polygonal graphics, and there's fixed camera angles. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, you're not getting any of that, but you're getting pretty much every single flavor of Resident Evil there's ever been, which is like a really courageous thing the developers did, but also it's very frustrating because of that, there's like, this game doesn't really have an identity. Like, you start in the village and then you go to the castle and then you go back to the village. Then you go to House Beneviento, which is just like a walking sim, like tightly scripted puzzle sequence. And then you go to the marshes where Moreau is, and then you go back to the village, and then you go to the Like, this game is just too over the place for me. But I would probably be okay with the game's just like ADD game design if the second half of the game, and this is like, the game has the same problem Resident Evil 7 has, where it's front loaded with all the great stuff, and then the second half of the game is just pretty mid. Like, Moreau's swamp section is straight out of the Revelations playbook of unremarkable third-person shooting. And then the final section, we do get a factory, and I love a good factory, Resident Evil 3, anyone, but the problem is that this factory is completely devoted to action. Like, by the end of Resident Evil Village, the game is just a straight up action game, which again, maybe I'm showing my age here, but honestly, I don't see too many people defending Village in a few years. Or at least not the factory section. Like, Heisenberg, sorry, not interesting. I haven't heard anyone talk about how much of a Riz magnet Heisenberg is, because all anyone talks about when talking about this game is Lady D, and with good reason. I do admire Capcom going absolutely batshit by deciding to like completely Metal Gearify the boss fight with, I think it's Heisenberg, where like you're basically just like it's like a mecha fight. Like, you're both in mecha suits, for Christ's sakes. Am I playing Resident Evil or Armored Core? This part is awesome just due to like the sheer randomness and the absolute nerve of Capcom to put this in the game, because I know it probably pisses off old heads like me who think this is like sacrilegious or whatever. But like, is this something I sincerely enjoy, or is it something I just enjoy ironically because it's so absurd? Like how Chris punches the boulder to kill Wesker at the end of Resident Evil 5. Like, it's that kind of just like random. All I can think about with this game is the castle section and Lady D, who's like this hot mom who will choke every millennial to death because she's taller and stronger than them. Which, yeah, like, as a millennial, I completely identify with, like, please choke me out and then put me out of my misery, mommy. Like, also, Village tries to model itself after Resident Evil 4 by reminding us of the vaguely rural aesthetics of Europe. It desperately wants you to remember how good that game was instead of trying to carve out its own unique identity. Like, the werewolf thing I'm pretty all right with. I know that's a deal breaker for some fans because werewolves remind people of like old fashioned classic Universal monsters that would be more like reminiscent of a Castlevania game than a Resident Evil game. And zombies are supposed to be, you know, this like hyper edgy critique of late capitalism, even though Resident Evil has really never like done critique, because it's a product of late capitalism itself. It's just this stupid fun horror franchise. But I don't know, just give me more of the castle and less of the swamp, I guess is what I'm saying. Or make House Beneviento a 20-minute kind of like just tightly scripted walking sim experience rather than like, well, I don't know. It's the puzzle is kind of interesting. It's just once you've done it once, once you've done House Beneviento once, you've done it the only way you can. And for me, the best Resident Evils thrive on replayability, and I don't want to keep replaying the House Benevento scene, even though the baby monster is extremely creepy the first time you see it. That part is legitimately like the most terrifying part in Village. But again, this is like the part in the game where you don't have a gun or any way to defend yourself. So it's just like, it reminds me more of Outlast than anything. And then like RE4 had like 3 areas. It had the village, it had the castle, and then it had the island. Like, if you wanna design a game similar to Resident Evil 4, like, give us the castle, give us the village, and then maybe give us the factory, and then cut out the rest of it. But who knows? Maybe this game will rank higher for me once I when I get older, because I am a father now, and I do relate to Ethan's struggle to find his daughter Rose. Like, my daughter's middle name is Rose. But there's also a reason that Part 7 and Village are first person, and it's because Ethan is such a
Wonder Bread
of a protagonist. Like, he has next to no personality outside of like looking at his hands being occasionally f***ed up. And yeah, I know the reason Capcom made Ethan Winters was because they wanted the player to feel like they were in the game themselves, but I don't want to play the game as myself. I'm boring. I don't have much personality. Like, I'm so glad Resident Evil 9 Requiem is giving us a new protagonist, because I don't think I can handle another game with an unremarkable dad as the main character. All right, here we go. I'm kind of pairing Resident Evil 0 and CVX together because they make me feel a similar way. They're games I'd both place as like high B's or low A's on a tier list, and mostly because, like, for me, these games are similar because they're both extremely difficult and they do similar, like, bullshitty soft lock things. I'd say 0 is slightly worse, and I'm not entirely sure why. I guess, like, 0 released during a weird time for survival horror. The shine on Resident Evil was already starting to dim. This is where the series got, started to get infamously wackadoodle with its storytelling. There's a goth baddie who sings opera and is some rival of Umbrella who allegedly started this whole Raccoon City incident based on how much he hated Umbrella, which is interesting. But you could just tell, like, the developers of this game, based on a lot of the music and the big bad, were probably playing a lot of JRPGs at the time. But obviously there are two things people talk about when talking about this game: the swap system and the item box, or lack thereof. I hated this idea of no item box because every review or like every take I saw of this game was how frustrating it was to no longer have the item box. So the item box works as like this magical portal where you can store items in there and then they transfer from every save room. There's no logistical reason why. It's just like a convenience thing for inventory space. But actually playing Resident Evil 0, I didn't mind it, because here's the thing I'll say. For the second area of the game, the area after the replica, like the kind of mansion replica second area of the game after the train, if you're going to play 0, I would recommend using the main lobby as your save area and where you drop all the items. So you just keep them in one large area and you can always return to it, because like the second area of the game is designed in a way where like you never can veer too far away from the lobby, which I really appreciate. So just drop all your shit in there and then you can go and grab it. Get it? Most people hate this, so like the Capcom learned its lesson here, and like inventory free, like being able to just drop your items wherever. Ended up, freedom isn't such a great thing after all, right? Like, sometimes we need things to be limited for a reason. But I will say, I think for one game in the franchise, it's allowed because it is an experiment, and I think it's an experiment that people are way too harsh on. Like, it makes the game stand apart. And it wouldn't be... And the reason why people hate it and why it's such a problem is because both Billy and Rebecca only have 6 inventory slots each, like Chris from Resident Evil 1. But as someone who has OCD, it actually feels relaxing, spending so much time in the menus, kind of like fiddling and with the items and transferring something from Rebecca to Billy. So like Billy doesn't know how to combine herbs because he's dumb or something. So every time you get a red herb, you have to like give it to Rebecca so she can combine it or whatever. Like, he knows how to use the herb, but he doesn't know how to. He's not a medic. Rebecca's the medic, and I think that's really solid. Like, I guess you could say environmental storytelling. This game, like, if you're able to stomach spending some time fiddling in the menus, you will have a good time, and it will like teach you patience, which is something I know I need more of. Like, Signalis of all games actually takes from Resident Evil 0, because that game also had a very cruel inventory limit and constantly had you going back to the save room to like open up inventory space. That's what I appreciate about this game, because it does force you to kind of like strategize and plan ahead. in a way that like classic Resident Evil always did this pretty well, but Zero in particular, like you really have to be on your P's and Q's to like get through that game. But like there are some flaws. The AI can be pretty reckless. Say you give Billy the grenade launcher and you put him on, you don't put him on idle, you have him attacking, he will just like spam all of his grenade. He'll waste all the grenade rounds on like pros if you let him. So you kind of like similar to Revelations 2, if you want to like actually get through the game, you have to kind of like swap it back and forth between Billy and Rebecca, or just put whoever's on the passive mode idle so they're not like wasting all your ammo. Now you could say like in Resident Evil 2, there's that one section with Ada and Leon when it's on the way to the lab where they're like kind of co-oping the game together and Ada's like shooting down zombies with you. That is amazing. And it works very well for the most part on the train section. But as the game goes on, it gets a little funky. So you kind of have to strategize, but also like, I don't know. I'm an introvert. Like Resident Evil 0 is Resident Evil 5 for introverts. I kind of love the fact that I have to like swap back and forth and be like, Billy is the big tank, so he'll have the grenade launcher and the shotgun. So like maybe I'll pop up a few handgun rounds as Rebecca, and then I'll switch over to Billy, and then I'll do a shotgun blast to the head to take out a zombie or whatever. I kind of love that shit. I like having control in that way. And similar to Village, Zero has that like classic Castlevania / Universal monster vibe. It's like Capcom wanted to collab with the Castlevania folks over at Konami. Like you take on a giant flying bat as a boss, and this boss is like infamously annoying as shit because he flies around, and this game has auto aim. Like you can't actually aim where you want to. But mostly why I think this game is underrated is I just appreciate another game in the series that takes place in the Arklay Mountains, like Resident Evil 1. It kind of feels like Resident Evil 1's younger sibling. Like these games, like the remake and Resident Evil 0 were developed around the same time and released around the same time, both for GameCube, and they even got the remastered re-release in 2015 together. So these games like spiritually belong together. And just the idea of Rebecca, like I really enjoy Rebecca as a protagonist. Like she isn't a combat technician, she's a medic, and she's also just like any base nurse, a workaholic. Like, where were Jill and Chris when this whole train incident was happening? Like, Alpha Team was waiting as Bravo Team was doing all of this. They had to do like all of this work the night before the mansion incident. And then on top of that, the next day, Rebecca has to do the mansion incident, you know, all the shit with Chris after the nightmare she endured with Billy. Like the fact that Rebecca has to unravel this rival conspiracy to Umbrella as she's teaming up with a man who may or may not have unalived a bunch of people. And then the very next day has to team up with Alpha Team to take on the mansion. Like Rebecca Chambers is the
hardest working woman in Resident Evil history.
And of course, Resident Evil Code Veronica X or CVX, a game that is even more polarizing than Zero. And you know what? I love this game, faults and all. It does have a ton of rough edges, but you could also argue it is the most like minute to minute fun in that classic first period of Resident Evil survival horror. Like, yeah, it maybe doesn't technically move as fast or snappy as Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, but the reason this game feels so fun and good to play at times is the knife. They finally figured out the knife in a way that is like incredibly satisfying. You get those like multiple hits in with Claire, and the graphics of this game, like it reminds me of like old school 90s, early 2000s arcade cabinets. Like it looks like it has the graphics of like an old school 90s arcade game. But of course, the deal breaker with Code Veronica is how cruel the game can be. If you're new to this game, prepare to enter into Softlock City, maybe multiple times, like whether it be the tyrant fight on the cargo plane or running away from Steve when he's trying to kill you, or the multiple times the game switches characters on you without telling you, like the Zap system in Resident Evil 2, but implemented in the most awkwardly terrible way possible. Like this game intentionally you. The developer has been quite open about the game's cruelty. It takes the trial and error of like, I guess Resident Evil 7's DLC, but instead of like Like, those were fine because those were like 20-minute experiences, whereas like Code Veronica is one of the longest games of the early period. Like, it's simply too much for some people, and I totally get that. This is the game in the series that made me realize either you're just built different as a survival horror fan, or you're probably going to hate this game and dismiss it. I did hate this game for the longest time because of its cruelty. It taught me to embrace the backtracking in Resident Evil, though, even if CVX does get pretty egregious with it. And the game is by no means like some kind of like tightly constructed masterpiece that I think everybody should play. It's incredibly sloppy. There's almost a tale of like two locations here. We've moved away from Raccoon City into the Rockfort prison island. The island is comprised of like outside sections, a military base, and an aristocratic estate that isn't as big as the RE1 mansion, but it kind of scratches a similar itch. Antarctica probably doesn't need to be in this game as much as it is. The strongest stuff is in the first half. The Chris stuff isn't engaging, and you can just kind of tell either the devs got bored or they just ran out of development time. Like, the design just gets pretty lazy at the end. Like, here's a bunch of like random herbs we threw into this one area of the game. Go nuts, I guess. You made it this far. And then there's like the irony of the game. Steve was one of the most problematic and annoying characters in the entire franchise, but he's so cringe that it actually makes him endearing. He tries to make out with Claire, who is clearly uninterested in him as like a romantic partner. And he does this while she's unconscious. He kills his zombified father with dual Uzis he loves so much. Like, he thinks it's so badass to dual wield guns, typical edgelord shit, that his dumbass almost ends up getting himself killed when he tries to grab him, and then Claire has to go run and save him. I have no idea how aware the devs were when making Steve this impotent, but whatever the intention, it does make the game more entertaining. Then there's the fact that they wrote a trans character as one of the main villains. It's very messy, and hopefully when they decide to make a remake, they do it with class this time instead of what they did here in 2000. Alfred/Alexia isn't a deal breaker, but it is enough of a distraction to ensure this game, along with all the gameplay roadblocks, isn't an essential Resident Evil unless you're absolutely willing to put yourself through the ringer. But geez, keep that in mind. It is a pretty unpleasant experience some of the time. And be prepared to have to start over unless you're playing with the phone, with the game. Unless you're playing the game with a phone in your lap or your laptop, which I wouldn't recommend. All right, now we're in the A tier. Resident Evil, the OG. If I was making this with my full heart, this game would probably be at the tippy top of the S tier list, because it just, not only does it provide the framework for everything that follows in a pretty like solid, coherent way, but I understand that this game is kind of quaint by today's standards, especially after what Resident Evil 2 was able to do just 2 years later. And the remake of this game is obviously the superior playing game, and in some sense kind of negates a lot of Resident Evil 1 96, but I still have a soft spot for this game because it is charming with its terrible voice acting and fun, and it is the creepiest game, I would say, in the series up until like Resident Evil 7. The music is iconic unless you're playing the director's cut with the soundtrack which was created by the deaf guy, which has been memed to death, and you can look up, the infamously bad track. I don't know, this game just has like a Sunday afternoon, like late in the winter time, like aristocratic feel to it. I'm not entirely sure what this means, but I was raised Catholic, so like I would go to church and then I would come home and I would play this game and get lost in it all day, and it just made me feel a certain way. And then, this game takes place in the forest of the Arclay Mountains, like this ultra isolated pocket of Raccoon City. And Raccoon City isn't the small suburban town everyone thinks it is. Like, this city has a subway station, for God's sakes. Like, I live in a relatively mid-sized suburban town, and there is no subway station here. And I do prefer the FMV opening of this game to the remakes, kind of like more grounded, serious approach. But I'll save the brunt of me glazing this game for the remake. Then after Resident Evil 1, I have to put Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, which if you think I'm some kind of old asshole who only likes classic Resident Evil, yeah, I'm putting Resident Evil 7 high on this list. Probably not high enough for certain people, but yeah, I would say overall, of all the new mainline games, Resident Evil, not counting the remakes, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is the best of the new Resident Evils. It is by far the scariest Resident Evil, but it does have problems. Like the first 3 sections of this game, by that I mean so Resident Evil Village has the really scary House Beneviento section where you don't have any weapons. Resident Evil 7 starts off that way. So Resident Evil 7's House Beneviento section is the game's first hour, the opening hour. When you find Mia and then you're running from her and then you have the boss fight with her, that section is absolutely peak. And then after that, you have the section with Jack Baker, where he's the stalker type enemy, and you're getting this reworked first person version of OG Resident Evil 1, but in this dilapidated, disgusting Louisiana swamp house, as this corrupted dad is chasing you around the house like it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then after that, you get a section that's arguably even scarier with Marguerite, who then becomes her own stalker type. Yeah, you get 2 stalkers in this game. But this game isn't just all intense. Oh yeah, and then there's this part is apparently very especially creepy when you're playing in VR. But I also really appreciate during Jack's section of the game, there's no zombie or molded monsters in the main floor of the Baker house, but once you go downstairs next to that save room and you go into the basement, there's all the molded in there, and that part is, there's no stalker enemy there, but it's now you're dealing with, so in this game you're either dealing with a bunch of zombies or molded, or you're dealing with the stalker types, and I like that kind of variety. And the basement section of that game is on another level of creepiness. But it's not just all scares. There's also the boss fight with Jack, where you're facing off with against each other with chainsaws, with the Evil Dead 2 groovy line or whatever. That stuff is incredibly fun, and I love that chainsaw fight, even though it doesn't fit in the game because it's supposed to be this well, it fits in the sense of it's it's another goofy thing in Resident Evil. And then there's the DLC, which this game has the best, outside of Resident Evil 4 Remake, the best run of DLC in the entire franchise, which is all, the banned footage gives you more lore and insight into like how the Bakers kind of fell apart as a family. And I think it's in the daughter scenario where if you can play the scenario wrong and end up like getting the bad ending. Like the first time I played it, I completely missed the computer that had the email where it kind of alludes to like the fact that Jack was kind of always a shitty, emotionally abusive parent. Not only like he didn't just become a violent piece of shit after the mold outbreak. He was always kind of like that, which I appreciate the game put that in. And then of course, like the DLC that everybody talks about with this game is End of Zoe, which I didn't think was as good as everybody else thought. Maybe I hyped it up in my head too much, and it obviously it plays better in VR, I'm sure. But I thought it was pretty, like, there's enough DLC in this game where it's like, just get the gold edition if it's on sale. It's well worth your money. But where this game, like, if this game was just those first three sections that I was mentioning, it would be a god tier Resident Evil. But unfortunately, it does then have the cringy Saw type stuff, which I'm kind of okay with, but then then you get the boat stuff in the end where it becomes more of like Revelations 1 and 2, and I'm just like, I'm killing molded with a machine gun, and I don't care anymore. And it's got a creepy doll like malevolent presence that's behind all of it. It's just like, I couldn't give less of a shit, unfortunately. So Barring the second half of Resident Evil 7, it's one of the best games in the franchise, but this is a common recurring pattern with the contemporary Resident Evils. Okay, now this is probably going to be the most controversial placement on the list. I'm just going to put them at 8 and 7, and so it's the Resident Evil Outbreak games that some people probably may not even know existed. Doesn't really matter here which one goes where. They're both, like, if you were to put a gun to my head, I would say the first game is probably the better one. To me, just because it feels more canon. It feels like the locations are all like classic Resident Evil locations, whereas like the second game, File 2, like you go to a fucking zoo in Resident Evil File 2, which is amazing. And you get to fight an elephant and shit, but you never get prior to Resident Evil Outbreak, there was no mention of like a zoo in Raccoon City. So it kind of feels a little fan servicey. Not saying it's not great, because File 2 plays much better than File 1 or Part 1. Part 1, the first Outbreak is much jankier. File 2, they cleaned a lot of stuff up, but yeah, these games are like notoriously janky too, especially if you play them. Like, these were online games, but apparently when these games were viewed, a lot of professional reviewers played them single player, which is not the ideal way to play these games. These games are legendarily difficult if you play them alone. I feel like playing this game with other people, with like the fixed camera angles and everything, if enough people played this game, I don't know, it feels like it has the potential. This is a very like naive, childish thing to say, but like I feel like if more people played these types of like games where you have to cooperate with each other in like ways where you have to like give people certain items, or you have to give, like, there's a medic in the group and you have to give them an herb, I feel like this is more conducive to like I guess you get some of this with like hero shooters, but it still seems like weirdly competitive, where this game is just straight up like, it functions differently than Resident Evil 5 for me, because Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 are just like these Gears of War type of like dual co-op, like couch co-op games, where like the extent of you like cooperating with your friend, your teammate, is either handing them an herb or saving them like with gunfire, where this game just feels like you have to be more coordinated. Like there's certain times in the game where like you'll be completely separated from the other players. Like you'll be in another area of the police station. So that's another reason why, like, simply put, why this game is so like, look at the locations you get with Resident Evil Outbreak. In Part 1, you get Jay's Bar, you get the lab from Resident Evil 2, you get the Raccoon City Hospital from Resident Evil 3, you get the Apple Inn Hotel, and then Raccoon City University. So if you felt gypped by the RE3 remake and all the, like, these games offer you like such an intimate glimpse into like Raccoon City, if you're starved for like Raccoon City style Resident Evil content and you miss fixed camera angles, like these games are for you. And the best part is you're not playing these games as stars or the stars. Get it? Like, these are common everyday type working people who are just trying to get out of this like situation and awkwardly coordinate together how to do it. And could you imagine if we got a remake of this game, like with over the shoulder gameplay in 2025 with online co-op? Actually, I don't know what I would prefer. I would pay $70 each just for like remasters of the 2003, 2004 games. And like any classic survival horror game, these two games offer like an embarrassingly insane amount of like replay value, because there's so many characters you can unlock who do different things and have different skills. And there are so many online co-op Resident Evil games that have shit the bed. I'm not talking about RE5. That game's good, and I probably like undervalue it. I underrate it because I've never like played through it with like an actual other human being. But I'm talking about like Reverse and Operation Raccoon City. Like, there are so many forgettable online PvP Resident Evil games, but Resident Evil Outbreak isn't like that at all. And it was unfortunately way, way, way ahead of its time. And I I hope we get a remake of those. Like I would honestly at this point rather take a remake of these two games than Code Veronica, Resident Evil 0, or definitely Resident Evil 5. Like, do we really need a remake of Resident Evil 5? Okay, this is probably the part of the video where I'm going to alienate the most amount of people. Well, depending on what type of Resident Evil fan you are, because I'm putting OG Resident Evil 4 at the highest, at the front end of the A tier.
Resident Evil 4 is the nirvana of the Resident Evil franchise.
It was great and innovative and ushered in a sea change that unfortunately brought a lot of unremarkable imitators. You don't get Resident Evil 6 or the Revelations games without the influence of Resident Evil 4. And I don't just mean the over-the-shoulder third-person combat. I'm also talking about this like obsession with upgrading and customizing your guns. This was the game in the series that made it less about survival horror and more about like how cool the guns were. Like, so many people talk about this game as if like what's the most iconic handgun pistol? Is it the Red 9? Is it, or talking about like getting the Chicago typewriter assault rifle and just using that throughout the game. Like the discourse around Resident Evil started to become more about like what the gun you most identify with rather than like overcoming an overwhelming situation. And don't get me wrong, Resident Evil 4 has some like amazing iconic moments. Like, people argue back and forth whether or not this game is like actually survival horror. I feel like the regenerators, like the island is the weakest part of the game. That's the last third of the game, but the island does have the regenerators, which are the things you have to like, you have to get the infrared scope on your sniper rifle, and then you have to like shoot off the plagas that are inside of them. I think that is really well done, both in the remake and the OG. But when I think of survival horror, like I don't really care about precision aiming. I don't care about making my gun stronger or being able to hold more clips or having a bigger magazine or having, better accuracy or higher rate of fire. These are just additions that haven't aged the series well, in my opinion. And I'm glad in the newer, well, I don't know. In Resident Evil 7, they got away from it, but then in Resident Evil 8, they brought it back. But I mean, this game was a bomb in the sense that like every action adventure adjacent game after Resident Evil 4 tried to influence it. Like, the series was popular and sold a lot in the late 90s when it was still like an old school survival horror type of thing. But it was so wild that by 2005, Resident Evil 4 was influencing the biggest action adventure games at the time. Like
Does Gears of War happen without Resident Evil 4? I don't know.
People are really annoyed with Ashley in this game. I don't mind like she's shrill, and they make her much more of a person in the remake, which is why one of the reasons why I have the remake above OG RE4. But I didn't mind the fact that RE4 is an escort mission for a lot of its runtime. Like, I think it's done simply enough where you just, the hardest thing you have to do is like, or the most complicated thing you have to do is tell Ashley to like go hide in a dumpster for 30 seconds as you like clean up the area, and then you let her out. Yeah, there are certain points where she'll get captured, but aside from like the castle, when you're trying to get into the castle and you have all those catapults going off with those like fire bombs and you're trying to escort Ashley through that section sucks. But like having her run up and like having to get the crank and you having to like take out Ganado as she's trying to like get platforms down for Leon, like that, to me, that stuff is peak. Like, I don't have a problem with that. I think all that stuff is implemented very well. Like, you get two sections in this game that are peak. There's like the village and the castle are, for the most part, very well done and very fun. It's just, it doesn't feel like fixed camera angle survival horror, and that's okay. Don't have a problem with that. And you have the cabin with Luis, like such a thrilling encounter in RE4. Like, RE4 is just like a collection of like white knuckle, intense, thrilling encounters. I think my personal favorite one now is the first boss fight with the singular Wolverine blind man. I think that fight is just very well done, and it's creepy and it's difficult. I'll be honest, when the RE4 remake came out, I I was like, what's the point? Because 2005 Resident Evil 4 already feels kind of like a modern game. Yeah, you don't use the triggers to shoot. It's still like kind of awkwardly implemented, but it's still over the shoulder third person combat, which is exactly what the RE4 remake ends up being. It's very, very similar to the original. And there's one big reason why I put the RE4 remake over the OG, and it's Ada Wong. I said earlier that Resident Evil 7 probably had the greatest collection of like DLC in the entire series, but Resident Evil 4 Remake has the best standalone DLC in the entire franchise, and that's Separate Ways, which was kind of like a throwaway thing in the original game, but they expanded it here and they've made Ada more of a character. And no, I'm not going to get into the Lily Gao discourse. Either you like Lily Gao's performance or you don't. I don't care at this point, but personally, I think the changes they made to both her and Ashley are a net positive, whereas they're both kind of throwaway characters for the Edgelords in 2005. Up next is Remake, the Resident Evil 1 remake, released in 2002. The old heads might be even angrier than me than the Resident Evil 4 heads, because this game, I understand for a lot of old school Resident Evil fans, this is like the number one. And you ask me on a certain day of the week, and I would definitely say it is. So let that just be a testament to like how great this series is and how many bangers are in this series that I'm placing Resident Evil 1 remake not at the tippy top of the god tier. Like, something I don't hear a lot of people talk about with Resident Evil is like the immense enemy variety, and you have it all here in the beginning of the series. You start with, and I haven't even talked about the Crimson Heads yet. You start off with the zombies in the mansion, then you get the dogs, then you go to the guardhouse, you encounter spiders, bees, corrupted plants, and even a shark. Not enough people glaze the guardhouse in Resident Evil 1 and Remake, but the guardhouse is really creepy. Oh, and I completely forgot to mention the hunters. Like, when you return to the mansion after getting, getting the helmet key in the guardhouse, like in that little like basement area, you go back you return to the mansion, and instead of zombies being there now, instead of zombies and dogs, it's now hunters and spiders. And the hunters are obviously an iconic, very difficult enemy in the Resident Evil franchise, and they are intense, and it does give the game more of like an action focus at the end, because now you're using grenade launchers and shit to take these motherfuckers out. And the fixed camera angles in this game are the best in the series. Like, I'm just going to take one off the top of my head. That fireplace area that leads to the snake fight with Yawn. Like, there's no zombies in that area, and it's not a save room, but it's like such a cozy and chill atmosphere. Like, Resident Evil 1 is such a creepy game, but it also is a game that has just like this cozy, comforting atmosphere. And I can't explain to you like why it is that way. It just is. And it's like the fact that it gives you both like such creepiness and overwhelming gameplay, but also like moments of serenity. I mean, to me, that's Resident Evil operating at like its highest capacity. And of course, in the remake, you get Lisa Trevor, which wasn't in the original game at all, which is kind of like the Silent Hill influence on the series. So there's this cabin Shinji Mikami put into or added into the remake that wasn't in the original game at all. And, you know, Lisa Trevor is a very like tragic character who had all these experiments done on her. And she was, you know, it just really shows off like the cruel indifference of the Umbrella Corporation. There are three main reasons why RE1 Remake is a god tier Resident Evil. Like the addition of the Crimson Head, which I'll talk about, this and the subversion of expectations, like the addition of Lisa Trevor and moving shit around, fucking with fans of the OG game. Like, I knew the original game pretty well when I played Remake for the first time, and I was so overwhelmed when I played Remake when I first played it in like 2002. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. And this game is way harder than Resident Evil 1. Like, this is one of the hardest games in the series, especially if you play as Chris. Like, Chris is a tank who can take a lot of damage like Billy and RE0, but he only has 6 inventory slots, which is very annoying. And it's why I prefer playing as Jill when I play this game. And the third reason why this game is god tier is the graphics, with the pre-rendered backgrounds, and it's still like with the remaster in 2015, like this game just pops. But yeah, the Crimson Heads are only in one game. They're only in remake, and I hope that stays that way because the Crimson Heads feel so unique to the remake. So when you kill a zombie in OG Resident Evil and all the Resident Evils before remake, you'd leave the room, and then if you came back to that room, the zombie was just gone. And the reason that is, the banal reason is that, the PlayStation 1 hardware couldn't run if there was just like dead zombies on the floor, littering the floor. So first time you're playing Resident Evil Remake, you might kill a zombie and then you'll be like, why is it still on the floor? Well, it's because if you leave and enter a room enough times, it depends. Like the math is a little funky, but like say you go through like the second floor hallway 3 times. On that third time after killing a zombie, if you don't set it on fire with the kerosene, which is another addition to the remake, that zombie will get up and it'll start chasing you and it'll claw you. That's a Crimson Head. And they can open doors and they can chase you. They can chase you into like other rooms, which was never done before. And this is such a brilliant mechanic because it plays with the inventory space too. Like I said earlier, Chris only has 6 inventory slots in this game, but his specialty item is the lighter. So you only have to bring the kerosene if you're playing as Chris to light the zombies, but if you're playing as Jill, you get 8 inventory slots, but you have to carry the lighter and the kerosene take up 1 slot each. So just keep that in mind. And this is the game where Wesker is still, I think, like an iconic villain in the franchise. I feel like by Code Veronica and 5, he's just kind of like a parody, but he's really creepy here, and his effectiveness is just being like a shill for Umbrella. So yeah. Okay, Resident Evil 3. Another one where if you ask me on a certain day of the week, I might put this one at number 1. Like, to me, this is the most fun, consistently fun Resident Evil game. It plays much faster than 1 and 2. You have the quick turn now with Jill, which is great. A lot of people think, Resident Evil 3, isn't that just like the really, really short game where you, like, because Resident Evil 2 has the zap system and Resident Evil 1 has 2 different playable characters. This game only has 1. It's just a very tight focus story on Jill Valentine's escape from Raccoon City as she's dealing with Nemesis. So the game is called Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and this is where the remake just completely does something different. You can say that regardless of what you think of Resident Evil 3 Remake, it didn't make Nemesis a pursuer the way Resident Evil 2 Remake made Mr. X a stalker-type enemy. I would even call Nemesis in Resident Evil 3 Remake a stalker-type enemy because it's so scripted so much of the time. Like Resident Evil 2 has Mr. X in the B playthrough, but he's limited to like scripted, kind of like Nemesis is in the remake of Resident Evil 3, but in OG 1999 Resident Evil 3, Nemesis is on another level. Like, so I said earlier, the stalker type enemy wasn't really a thing until like the Clock Tower series, and then Resident Evil 2 kind of did it with Mr. X, but then they fully fleshed it out in a year with Nemesis. And this game gets a bad rap. Like, some people think Code Veronica should be like the actual part 3 because, you return to Raccoon City, you go to the police department. But Nemesis just changes the game. Like, the fact that you never feel comfortable going from screen to screen, because when you hear that like creepy ambient music playing, Nemesis is close. And it's not like he slowly pursues you. He chases you, and it's really hard to capture footage of Nemesis in OG Resident Evil because he runs at you so fast. Like, he runs faster than you do. So even if you're running at full speed trying to get away from him, he'll catch up to you really quickly. I don't know how the developers pulled this off in 99 without the game just completely busting all the time, and especially with like how little time turnaround they had to make. Like, I don't know if it was like a B team that made Resident Evil 3, because I know there was a B team that made the Resident Evil 3 remake. It wasn't the same team who worked on RE2 Remake. Plus, you get the like choose your own adventure type of binary now, where every time you encounter Nemesis, you can either like run away from him or you can try to take him on. Like, the first fight against him in the police station or outside the police station is like one of the hardest boss fights in the entire series because you're so underpowered and you don't have enough health and ammo. But if you take them out, you're like greatly rewarded by getting this awesome OP handgun. And then there's the weapon crafting system, which Resident Evil will go on and keep. to me, I prefer this over what Resident Evil 4 started to do with like customizing your guns and making them like this is survival horror in a way that feels like I'm actually playing in a way where I'm customizing not what type of handgun I want to use, but what type of like ammo I want to use. Like, do I prefer my grenade launcher and do I prefer making like ice rounds, which is also a new addition where the freeze rounds. So you get like kind of like an RPG feel because you have flame rounds, you have acid rounds, and you have freeze rounds round. And the freeze rounds against Nemesis are like essential because it kind of like locks him in place and you can kind of stun lock him and just spam him to death but you have to know how to create freeze rounds. Yeah, it gives the game a whole lot of variety. And that's not even to mention, like, every time you replay this game, you can take different routes through Raccoon City. Like, when I was talking about RE3 Remake and how there's, like, no distinction between downtown and uptown Raccoon City, like, OG Resident Evil 3 gives you, like, very distinct flavors of, like, what uptown is like and what downtown is like, and then you backtrack back to uptown. This game does have a lot of backtracking, but it all makes sense, and it's not too overwhelming like it is in Code Veronica. And Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 are great, but you spend so much time in the mansion and the police station, whereas in this game, like, you're not in one section for too long. It starts with uptown Raccoon City, and then you go to the police station, and then you go to downtown, then you go to the clock tower, then you go to the hospital as Carlos, then you go to the like graveyard / park, and then you finish off in the Dead Factory. And yeah, the clock tower and the Dead Factory are both like really, I think, great additions to, like, yeah, the clock tower isn't very long, but it's just so creepy. And Resident Evil 3 has both interior and outside game design, which I really appreciate. Like, you get a mix of each. And I kind of prefer Nikolai as a villain over Wesker because he just seems kind of more grounded. I like how Nikolai is he's only in this game and that's it. He's kind of like a one-off, where Wesker, they just tried to do too much with him and made him like too wackadoodle. Nikolai is like very cruel and abusive and manipulative, but somehow in like a slightly different way than Wesker, which I appreciate. Like, he just gives me the chills. I don't think there's another game in the entire franchise that tells, like, yeah, it's not earth-shattering, it's not like super complex, but I feel like this game tells the most coherent, concise story. And the fact that it stars Jill Valentine, it makes her, like, she's probably my favorite character of the franchise just because of this game alone, because it's such a like personal story between her and trying to get away from this like obsessive stalker enemy who, like the Terminator or Michael Myers, only has one objective, and that's to like end her. Okay, so here we are. Number 2 and number 1 are both versions of Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 2 was the first Resident Evil game I ever played. I bought Resident Evil 1 because it had the Resident Evil 2 demo, or I guess my parents did. I think my parents paid for it. I was a preteen at this point. And like the actual demo of Resident Evil 2 kind of did something different from like what you actually do in the actual version of Resident Evil 2, which reminded me of the Resident Evil 7 beginning hour demo, which I love that shit. Everything I love about Resident Evil is contained in both these versions of Resident Evil 2, though. Like, yeah, we've moved out of like the rural creepiness and isolation of the first game, but like now we're in the actual city. Well, we're in the sewers and the police station, but I'll take it. And the RE2 remake is similar to the RE1 remake in that it loves to fuck with the fans of the original. Like, there's this great example where the developers moved the safe that I believe was originally in the east hallway in 98 Resident Evil 2. They moved it to the west hallway, which was the area where Marvin used to be, but now Marvin in the remake hangs out in the main lobby of the police station as he's like slowly becoming a zombie. An RE2 remake is similar to RE1 remake, a more difficult game. Like, Resident Evil 2 is one of the easier games in the franchise because they give you a lot of health and a lot of ammo. And it's also scarier. Like, the lights go out in certain areas of the station at times, so you really don't know where you're going and you're getting like discombobulated. And this is even before Mr. X shows up. And Mr. X shows up and makes things much more urgent and stressful. And you have to deal with barricading windows now. Like, punishment in Resident Evil has always been a thing. Like, if you don't know where you're going, the game will punish you. And this is why, like, sometimes you can soft lock yourself out of progress if you're lost and you can't find a key item and you keep returning to the same areas. If you do that in Resident Evil 2 Remake, zombies will start coming through the windows unless you barricade them, which is now it's its own inventory item, is having these boards you can put up to make sure they don't come in. I replayed Resident Evil 2 Remake before making this video, and for the first time I played as Claire instead of Leon at first, and it was shocking how easy the game started as Claire. Like, I had almost 100 handgun rounds, and I had like a first aid spray and 3 full herbs. But that's when the zombies started appearing. When I was backtracking, more and more zombies just start pouring through. And with Claire, when you get to the basement, it's not dogs you have to deal with, it's lickers. So, like, within 10 minutes of the game, I literally went from having like 80 handgun clips to having like less than 10. And I love that shit, because that's like the uncertainty of survival horror and doubting yourself and being like, am I going to can I make it through this, or do I have to start over the game? Which I know is a deal breaker for some people, but for me, like, I live for that shit, because it's stressful, but if you can overcome it, it gives you I guess kind of a similar feeling to like beating a boss in Dark Souls. Sometimes in Resident Evil, it feels like you're constantly making the wrong decisions, which is something that Code Veronica like intensely punishes you for. And Resident Evil 2 Remake has that, but in a less overwhelming way, I would say. Especially like doing that, getting that Jack to like do the library puzzle now as Nemesis is constantly like. So the library is completely switched up. In the OG, the library is just like this chill room. It has great like atmosphere. The music is great, but there's no zombies or anything. Whereas in the remake, they flooded the library with zombies. And then Mr. X trying to chase you in there as you're trying to do that puzzle to get the chess piece if you're Leon, or the stone if you're playing it, or the tablet if you're playing as Claire. And of course, Resident Evil 2 wouldn't be Resident Evil 2 without the lickers. Not bipedal like the hunters, they awkwardly crawl towards you at a speed that shouldn't be possible. And in the remake, they can now crawl on the wall and in the ceilings. And this is one instance where I'm like, okay, precision aiming. I'll take precision aiming over the auto lock on, but they're also blind. So if you're patient, you can just kind of like really slowly shimmy out of the hallway. But that's the thing. They're always in hallways. So they're always in like these really tight quarters. And if you touch them, they'll sense you and then you're but if you can get out of the hallway without alerting them, that's such a satisfying feeling. Like, there's a stealth element to Resident Evil 2. I wish the sewer section in the remake adhered more closely to the original. I'm not a fan. I'm not crazy about the sewer section in Resident Evil 2 Remake. They made it just way too... I get lost in there too easily, and I'm not crazy about like the enemy types in there. I prefer the original, even though the original is like incredibly short. And you can't talk about RE2 without mentioning the lab, which I would say is by far the best lab / final level Capcom ever made, including the Dead Factory in Resident Evil 3. And I think the changes they did in the remake lab are great. Like, they made that kind of annoying plant character that would poison you in the original. It's more of like an actual enemy that pursues you now, and Capcom just utilizes the space in Resident Evil 2 Remake far better than the original ever could hope to. But why is OG Resident Evil 2 number one for me? I think it's one simple reason: nostalgia. Nostalgia is a funny thing. Some people hear the word and they get triggered like it's some sort of insult, but I don't think any of us truly understand like the power and necessity, especially as it pertains to the human condition in the 21st century. Like, nostalgia is certainly a drug and a potent one, but I wouldn't want to live without it. I don't think it's a bad thing. I asked ChatGPT why I prefer Resident Evil 2 98 to the remake, and this is a response that spat back to me in less than 2 seconds.
OG RE2 is a masterpiece because of what it couldn't do. The tank controls, fixed camera angles, pre-rendered backgrounds, they all created formal tension. You were playing a cinematic simulation with your own body as the weak link, not because the game wanted to immerse you, but because it had to work around hardware and design limits. The fear wasn't photoreal, it was existential essentially had to fill in the gaps yourself. The remake, in contrast, is complete. It does everything for you: lighting, sound, perspective. There's less room for your imagination, and nostalgia is often the longing for that incompleteness. So the nostalgia isn't for the game, it's a form of relation between you and the game that no longer exists.
Yearning for canceled/lost futures. What I was yearning for wasn't the past, but rather for the futures that were once promised to us. When I first played RE2 in 1998, I wasn't critical of it, of thinking, oh man, how much better would this game be with photorealistic graphics and Mr. X pursuing me throughout the game. Resident Evil 2 in 1998 felt awkward, but it also felt like shockingly new. I was excited about living in the moment and enjoying the game, but I was also really thrilled about what was coming next. Like any ADD millennial kid, I wanted more and more and more, like an addict running from the present moment. And yet playing OG Resident Evil 2 in 2025 feels like the greatest comfort in the world to me. It doesn't feel uncanny or unsettling or any of those cliche horror things that horror games are supposed to make you feel. When my dog was dying, it was the only game I wanted to play because I knew it was the one game that could calm me down. So what do I value then? It isn't necessarily horror or uncertainty. I hate uncertainty. I value familiarity, safety, security, mastery. Like, I'm playing the game on autopilot, not because I want to experience immersion, but because I want to experience peace. Lupe Fiasco was once asked, if hip-hop was gone tomorrow, would the world be a better place? And without hesitation, Lupe responded, if the world would be better without hip-hop, then yeah, I'd prefer that world, because creativity doesn't die, it just finds another form. If the world was better off without survival horror games, as ridiculous as that is to say out loud, I'm pretty sure I'd take it. Because what I love about survival horror isn't how it frames the trauma and uncertainty necessarily. It's about creatively overcoming that trauma and uncertainty, however briefly that feeling might last. Overcoming it doesn't happen through sheer will alone, though. It happens with the help of friends and family, and oftentimes online strategy guides. Resident Evil doesn't offer any sort of scathing critique of capitalism. It's mostly a stupid and oftentimes fun franchise. Sometimes I wish it would lean into critique more, but where has centuries of critique gotten us? It's gotten us to the point that reiterating on the original isn't just the safest bet, but the only one. The most frustrating thing about nostalgia is when you're looking for it to validate you and it doesn't, or make you feel a certain way and it doesn't. Like, it's such an elusive thing. It's an abstraction because it can't be measured or captured. It simply belongs to our memories, and our memories are rarely, if ever, accurate. So why do we hold on then? The reason I prefer OG Resident Evil 2 is because of what it doesn't give me. The absence that my imagination has to fill in. Fixed camera angles mean you can only see what the developer wants you to see, not what you want to see. Before I was a survival horror fan or a Resident Evil fan, I was a millennial. I will always be a millennial. My entire identity is tied to nostalgia, whether I want it to be or not. A nostalgia for what, though? A future that was already canceled before I was born? Is this just like more woe is me bullshit? The New York band Geese say, I'm getting killed living a good life. I spent so much of my life consuming acclaimed works of art as the world seems to be becoming more and more indifferent. Is this all that's there for us now? Is consuming great works of art that make us feel a certain way for a brief period of time, and often uses nostalgia to give us the hope that things can be different in the future by going back to the past and reclaiming what was supposedly lost? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have ranked Resident Evil 5 or Resident Evil Village as low as I did, and maybe I shouldn't have been as harsh on them, because like Resident Evil has always started off, even the old flavor of Resident Evil, it started off as survival horror and not having enough ammo or health. But by the end of the games, whether it's the factory in Resident Evil Village or the lab in Resident Evil 2 or the dead factory in Resident Evil 3 or the lab in Resident Evil 1, by that point, the games, I do admit, do become more action. You're taking on hunters with grenade launchers. You're taking on lickers with customized shotguns that have such impact that they bounce Leon back and forth from one pre-rendered screen to the next. But I don't know. That's my list. So happy Halloween, Resident Evil fans. Don't be too mad at me, because after all, this is just one person's opinion. And yes, my opinion is correct, but we're just having fun here. So how would you rank the Resident Evil series? Let me know. Please make sure to let me know in the comments below, because even though I say I don't read comments, sometimes my self-esteem gets the better of me, and I do read every comment, even the ones that are harsh. That's life.